Today, the book we're doing a deep dive into is a Nobel Prize winning work, Poor Economics. Let's start with a common assumption. When you think of poor people, do you subconsciously believe they are poor because they don't work hard enough? Either they're lazy or they spend money recklessly, making aid useless? However, the story of an Indonesian farmer named Pak Sudarno in Poor Economics will challenge that impression. She lives in a slum in Bandung. Her husband passed away early, leaving her to raise 7 children alone. To make ends meet, she works as a domestic helper in Jakarta. Her eldest son dropped out at age 12 to become an apprentice at a construction site, and her 2 youngest children had to be sent to their grandparents. Yet, despite all this, she never gave up. Knowing her youngest son was smart, she grit her teeth, borrowed money, and managed to send him to secondary school, saying she would rather skip 2 meals herself than deny her child the chance to be literate. The authors, Abhijit and Esther, the scholars who later won the Nobel Prize in Economics, spent 15 years traveling through rural villages and slums across 18 countries. They didn't just sit in an office talking theory. They used randomized controlled trials, much like clinical drug trials, to uncover the truth. For example, in a Kenyan village, they randomly gave one group of families free mosquito nets and didn't give any to another, then observed the change in malaria rates. In Indian schools, they gave one group of children incentives for timely attendance, and not the other, and tracked their dropout rates. It was these solid, empirical investigations that made them realize many of our common assumptions about the poor are completely wrong. For instance, some say the poor only care about today's meal and ignore tomorrow. But the authors saw farmers in Uganda dividing their meager savings into 2 parts, one for food and the other for fertilizer. Even knowing they might face drought next year, they wanted to try and grow more crops. Others claim the poor don't want their children to go to school. But a survey in Rajasthan, India, showed that 80% of parents want their children to reach secondary school. Their fear is simply that they'll spend the money and the child still won't find a job, resulting in a wasted investment. These poor people aren't lazy or lacking ideas. They are trapped by a multitude of invisible pitfalls. They want to buy iodized salt for their children to prevent illness, but the local shop only sells plain salt. They want a loan to start a small stall, but the bank won't lend because they lack collateral, forcing them to turn to moneylenders for high-interest loans. When a child has a fever and needs a doctor, the public clinic doctor is often absent, and they can't afford the private hospital. Today, let's follow the author's footsteps and enter the daily lives of the poor to see the small troubles we often overlook. For example, how a meal lacking nutrition, a missed vaccine dose, or a textbook they can't afford slowly turn into an inescapable poverty trap. Then, we'll discuss what we can do to help them remove these small obstacles one by one. Let's start with the most basic necessity, food. Many people think the biggest problem for the poor is simple hunger. They assume that if they can just get more food into them, things will improve. But the author's research in Indian slums debunks this conventional wisdom. In the state of Maharashtra, India, the authors visited hundreds of poor families and discovered a strange phenomenon. These families were often hungry, yet they would spend about 30% of their income on things like tobacco, alcohol, and festival feasts, while reducing their intake of cheap filling coarse grains. There was a farmer named Raj who, with his family of 5, barely earned enough from odd jobs to buy 2 kilograms of rice daily. Yet, during important Hindu festivals, he would still borrow money to buy mutton and sweets to host a small family feast. Why is this? It's not that Raj doesn't know how to manage money. It's that the lives of the poor are so devoid of hope. For them, being stuck in the loop of working, being hungry, and sleeping, occasionally eating something delicious or holding a festive gathering is one of the few ways they can fight despair. More crucially, they suffer from a severe information gap. Most poor people don't know that a lack of micronutrients like iodine and iron is more dangerous than simple starvation. Nearly half of India's poor children suffer from impaired brain development due to chronic iodine deficiency, leading to poor concentration and memory in school. This directly paves the way for their future poverty. Furthermore, the poor are wary of long-term investment. If they save a mouthful of food today to buy nutritious ingredients, but then face a drought next year with no harvest, the whole family might starve. So they prefer to satisfy their immediate hunger and cravings. Now, let's talk about healthcare. We might think that if we give the poor life-saving medical tools like mosquito nets for malaria prevention or oral rehydration solution for dysentery, they will definitely use them. But the reality is disheartening. In one village in Kenya, aid organizations handed out free malaria nets, but the usage rate was less than 30%. When the authors investigated, they found that many villagers thought the nets were only for children, believing adults were strong enough and didn't need them. Others felt that malaria was destiny and a net wouldn't change anything. Even more frustrating is the case of oral rehydration solution in India. Even when nurses prescribed ORS, which quickly replenishes water, mothers often insisted the doctor prescribe antibiotics instead. They believed that only injections and medicine counted as treatment, and drinking salt water was useless. The problem behind this is complex. On one hand, there is a trust problem. The poor trust results they can see immediately. Antibiotics quickly reduce a child's fever, but the benefits of mosquito nets or ORS take time to materialize, and they lack the patience to wait. On the other hand, government healthcare services are failing them. Many public clinic doctors in India are absent half the time. Even when present, they spend only 3 minutes per patient, quickly prescribing some random medicine and dismissing them. Over time, the poor lose trust in public healthcare. There is also the problem of time cost. The poor must work daily to earn money. Spending time to collect a mosquito net or take a child to the clinic delays that day's income. Between immediate survival and future health, they have to choose the former. Next, let's talk about children's education. Many people assume the poor don't want their children to attend school because they are short-sighted. But the author's investigation in rural India revealed the helplessness behind this. In a public school in Rajasthan, India, 50% of the children who reached 5th grade still couldn't read all the first grade texts. It wasn't that the children were slow. It was because the teachers were constantly absent. The authors observed for a month and found that the teachers at this school missed an average of 1 day out of every 5. Even when they showed up, they simply read from the textbook or chatted with other teachers without seriously teaching. How could parents dare to keep their children in a school like that? Many parents have a misconception that education is an all-or-nothing proposition. If a child achieves top grades and can become a teacher or a civil servant later, then school is worth it. But if the grades are average, it's better to drop out early and start working to earn money. The opportunity cost is too high. Every extra year a child stays in school is a year less income for the family. And if they still can't find a good job later, all that time and money is wasted. However, there are good solutions. Mexico and India have both tried conditional cash transfer programs. As long as children attend school regularly, the government sends money to the family. In India's pilot program, this policy reduced the local dropout rate by 30%. This is because it helps parents hedge the risk. Even if a child's grades are temporarily poor, the family still receives a subsidy. So they aren't forced to pull the child out of school for survival. Finally, let's discuss raising children. We might wonder why the poor have so many children. Is it because they don't know about contraception? Not necessarily. In one village in Bangladesh, the authors found that most women were aware of birth control methods, yet still had 3 to 4 children. A woman named Hasina, who already had 2 daughters, was still trying to have a son. She told the authors, "When I get old, I have no pension, no health insurance. I can only rely on a son to support me. Daughters marry out and belong to another family. I can't count on them." This is the survival logic of the poor. Without a robust social security system, raising children to secure old age is their only option. More brutally, in many impoverished areas, girls face unfair treatment. Rural Indian girls are breastfed for a shorter period than boys and rarely receive timely treatment when sick. Their mortality rate is much higher than that of boys. Some African families force their daughters to drop out early, to work in factories to save money for a son's bride price. It's not that the parents don't love their daughters, but in the face of survival priority, they must sacrifice their daughter's well-being. These seemingly insignificant small troubles, poor diet, inadequate healthcare, children failing in school, and the pressure of raising children are slowly pushing the poor into deeper poverty. These living struggles, in turn, further impact their economic lives because poor health prevents them from working efficiently, because lack of education prevents them from finding good jobs, and because raising many children prevents them from saving money. Next, let's explore how these living difficulties trap the poor in even bigger financial trouble with their wallets. After discussing the daily lives of the poor, let's now focus on their finances. Many people think the poor don't save money because they are bad at managing it, can't get loans because they lack credit, or fail at business because they lack ability. But the truth is far more complex. Let's start with risk management. The poor deal with risk every day, for example, drought causing crop failure or sudden family illness, yet their methods for coping with risk often come at an extremely high cost. In a slum in Kenya, the authors met a vendor named Mary, who went to the wholesale market at 4 a.m. every day to buy and sell fruit, earning just enough to survive. Once, she lost her wallet while buying inventory. She had no choice but to turn to a moneylender for a loan with a daily interest rate as high as 4.69%. This means borrowing 100 units would result in a staggering amount of repayment after 1 year. She had no choice. Without the loan, she couldn't buy inventory, and her entire family would starve. Farmers in India face even greater helplessness. They know high-yield cotton is more profitable, but cotton requires frequent watering. If a drought hits, the harvest will be completely lost. Therefore, many farmers prefer to plant low-yield, but drought-resistant millet, accepting smaller earnings rather than gambling on high-yield crops. Some might ask why they don't buy agricultural insurance. The authors found that the terms and conditions for crop insurance in India are incredibly complicated, like reading an ancient text so farmers can't understand them. Furthermore, the claims process is particularly tedious, requiring multiple trips and various documents from government departments. Many struggle for days and still don't receive compensation. After a while, the poor conclude that insurance is a scam. They would rather shoulder the risk themselves than trust any protection mechanism. Next, let's look at the difficulty of getting a loan. When it comes to lending to the poor, many worry they will default on loans. But the microfinance case studies in the book overturn this prejudice. Spandana, a microfinance institution in India, specializes in lending to poor women to start small businesses like sewing clothes or selling vegetables. The organization doesn't require collateral. It relies only on a group lending model where a few households form a group, guarantee each other, and if one person defaults, the entire group loses access to future loans. Surprisingly, this model has a repayment rate as high as 98%, more reliable than many loans offered to the rich. However, microfinance has its limits. It can help the poor survive, but it struggles to help them thrive. The authors found that the money women receive is only a few thousand rupees, equivalent to a few hundred US distant enough to buy some inventory and simple tools. If they want to expand their business, perhaps by buying a sewing machine or renting a fixed stall, the money is far from enough. Because microfinance institutions are risk-averse, they dare not give the poor more money. After all, the poor have no stable source of income, and if an unexpected event occurs, they might indeed be unable to repay the loan. Consequently, many poor people are stuck running tiny businesses for pocket change, never escaping the cycle of small-scale operations. There's also the challenge of saving money. We might think saving just requires cutting down on spending, but the poor lack even a safe place to save. In rural Morocco, The authors saw women hiding money in wall cracks or tucking it under their mattresses. Others deliberately leave their houses unfinished walls built, but no roof because a completed house would be borrowed by relatives and friends. An unfinished house, however, cannot be borrowed, making it a unique savings container. Why don't they save money in the bank? It's not that the poor don't want to. It's that banks don't welcome them. The transaction cost for a bank to process a single deposit is fixed. When the poor deposit only 10 or 20 units at a time, the interest the bank earns isn't enough to cover the processing fee. Moreover, banks view the poor as having poor credit, fearing they might incur debt, and thus simply don't deal with them. In India, the authors found that one village was over 20 kilometers from the nearest bank. The poor had to spend half a day traveling and then queue up to fill out complex forms. After a full day of hassle, they might still fail to deposit any money. However, some local methods have helped the poor solve the savings problem. For example, a community rotating savings and credit association gathers 50 units from 10 households each week, pooling 500 units, which is then rotated to one household at a time. The family that receives the money can use it to buy inventory or pay school fees, while the families who haven't yet received it are forced to enforce savings. Other organizations gave the poor locked savings boxes money could be deposited but not easily withdrawn, and an authorized staff member had to unlock it at an agreed-upon time. Experiments in India showed these simple methods could increase the savings rate of the poor by 20%. In reality, the poor are not incapable of saving. They simply lack reliable savings tools. Finally, let's talk about business. Many poor people are actually micro-entrepreneurs selling flatbread, repairing shoes, or running street stalls, but their businesses rarely grow. In Indian slums, 1 out of every 6 households sells flatbread. Everyone sets up their stall at the same corner, leading to such intense competition that their earnings are only enough to buy flour. Kenyan vendors have to take out high-interest loans every day to buy inventory. After selling the goods and repaying the interest, the remaining money is just enough to eat. They have no capital to scale up. The authors point out that these poor people are not natural entrepreneurs. They are forced entrepreneurs because they cannot find stable work and must rely on small businesses to survive. The key reason their businesses don't grow is the lack of a stable income source and a ladder for growth. A case in the book is very typical. In a village near a new factory in India, men who got factory jobs received a fixed salary every month. Their families could not only buy nutritious food and send their children to secondary school, but also save money for their daughters' books. This stable income gave them the confidence to invest in the future and slowly escape poverty. In contrast, the unemployed poor are trapped in a cycle of earning small sums, repaying high-interest loans, and then earning small sums again. In truth, the difficulties the poor face in their economic lives, the high cost of risk management, difficulty getting loans, difficulty saving, and inability to scale up businesses are all rooted in a lack of reliable mechanisms and fair opportunities. To solve these problems, we cannot rely solely on the efforts of the poor themselves. Policy and societal assistance are necessary. Next, let's discuss exactly what kind of solutions can help the poor dismantle these economic traps one by one. When we talk about solving poverty, many people often sigh first, feeling that if the system is imperfect, nothing we do will make a difference. But the case studies in poor economics show us that change doesn't always require tearing things down. Sometimes a small adjustment can leverage huge change. Let's start with the story of fighting corruption through newspapers in Uganda. In the early years, the Ugandan government allocated funds to rural schools to improve facilities, but most of the money was skimmed off by local officials. The authors found that only 13% actually reached the schools. The rest either bought officials new cars or went straight into their own pockets. Later, someone came up with a simple idea. Clearly publish the exact amount of funding each school was supposed to receive in the local newspaper. Suddenly, parents knew how much money their children's schools should have. They rushed to inspect the school accounts and proactively reported problems to the education department. Fearing exposure, Officials stopped arbitrarily withholding funds. In just 1 year, the funding receipt rate soared from 13% to 80%. This case is particularly touching. What the poor lack is not a perfect system, but transparent information and a channel to speak up. Similarly, India later promoted electronic voting, allowing villagers to vote via mobile phones, which reduced manipulation or forced voting. Brazil used an electronic audit system where every single government expenditure could be tracked, preventing politicians from misusing funds. These changes were not earth-shattering revolutions. They simply transformed shady operations into sunlight and transparency. Yet they genuinely helped the poor receive the resources that were rightfully theirs. Next, let's look at the idea of precisely dismantling traps. Many believe solving poverty requires giving a lot of money, for instance, handing every poor family tens of thousands of currency units to start a business. But the authors found that sometimes spending a few dollars to solve a small problem has a better effect. There was an experiment with anti-worm tablets in Kenya. Due to poor sanitation, local children were prone to intestinal parasites, often suffering from stomach aches, low energy, poor concentration in class, and even dropping out early. An aid organization distributed free anti-worm tablets, costing only $1.36 per person annually. After taking the tablets for 2 years, the children's health improved significantly. School attendance rates increased, and as adults, their earnings in the job market were 20% higher than children who didn't take the medicine. Another case is iodized salt in India. Rural pregnant women often suffered from iodine deficiency, which affected their children's brain development, leading to poor academic performance later. The government promoted iodized salt, asking pregnant women to consume a small amount daily. The cost was extremely low, yet their children's school performance was 7.5 percentage points higher than those whose mothers did not consume iodized salt. These examples show that the poverty trap is often a chain reaction. Iodine deficiency affects brain development, leading to poor grades, which leads to dropping out, which leads to poor job prospects, leading back to poverty. Solving the problem doesn't require breaking the whole chain at once. You just need to precisely identify the most critical link and fix it with a small cost to leverage the entire cycle. Distributing anti-worm tablets, for example, seemed only to solve a minor stomachache problem, but helped them secure the opportunity of education, which changes destiny. More importantly, we need to break the poor's self-fulfilling prophecy. Many poor people hesitate to attempt change because they've seen too many failures. A neighbor borrowed money to start a business and lost it. A relative paid for a child's schooling, but they still couldn't find a job. Slowly, they conclude, no matter how hard I try, it's useless. But the experiment with women village council leaders in the book showed us hope. Historically, in Rajasthan, India, the village council head had to be a man. Many women felt they were incapable of managing village affairs. Then the government mandated that some villages must elect a woman as the village council head. At first, the men mocked the women, saying, they can barely handle household chores. How can they manage the village? But 2 years later, these female leaders delivered excellent results. They spent more money on building water wells and schools, things women and children needed most, and they resolved many minor disputes that men were unwilling to handle, like family conflicts and helping women apply for subsidies. More surprisingly, the local men's attitudes changed. They started believing women could be good leaders. Even the young girls in the village dared to tell their mothers, I want to be the village council head when I grow up. This experiment is hugely significant. Poverty is not just a lack of money. It's also a lack of hope and self-confidence. When the poor see that someone has succeeded through effort and that policies genuinely help, they begin to believe they can change too. Just like those young girls who saw the female leaders succeed, a seed of, I can do it, was planted in their hearts. That is more important than any amount of money you give them. The truth is, solving poverty is never an either or choice, either perfect or useless. Whether it's the newspaper fighting corruption in Uganda, the anti-worm tablets in Kenya, or the women village council leaders in India, these small changes are not ultimate solutions, but they are helping the poor remove obstacles and rebuild confidence, one step at a time. And these small changes, accumulated together, will eventually become the great force that breaks poverty. Next, let's discuss the deeper meaning behind these changes and what each of us can do to help eliminate poverty. As we wrap up, let's reflect on the most compelling takeaway from Poor Economics. The book doesn't attribute poverty to the poor being unintelligent or lazy, nor does it make the vague promise that poverty will naturally disappear once the economy develops. Instead, it uses 15 years of empirical research to tell us that poverty is more like a dense, tangled net. What traps the poor is not a single, huge difficulty, but countless small obstacles. It's the lack of awareness that iodized salt can protect a child's brain. It's the public clinic doctor being constantly absent. It's wanting to save but having no safe place to put money. It's the self-doubt that follows effort without seeing hope. Yet, the book also shows us that this net is not inescapable. Every small obstacle can be slowly dismantled. A newspaper in Uganda publishing the funding amount was enough to return the skimmed education budget to the schools. A $1.36 anti-worm tablet in Kenya was enough to secure a child's chance to attend school. A single post for a woman village council leader in India was enough to make young girls dare to dream. I can change my destiny too. These changes aren't earth-shattering, but they genuinely move the lives of the poor forward, one step at a time. Many people ask, my individual power is so small, what can I actually do? The truth is, you don't need to volunteer abroad or donate a large sum of money. Even just learning more about the actual lives of the poor, no longer believing they are poor because they don't try hard enough, and no longer thinking a little cash is enough, constitutes help as a form of change. When you see a charity project focusing on children nutrition in poor areas, taking the time to ask one more question or share it one more time might lead to more children getting iodized salt and anti-worm tablets. Even in your daily life, showing more understanding to those working hard to survive, such as being patient with the aunt setting up a stall in your neighborhood or giving a delivery driver an extra word of thanks, is a step toward breaking the prejudice that poverty equals inferiority. The authors conclude the book by saying, success is not always as far away as it seems. Sometimes it is hidden in those small actions that we deem insignificant. Eradicating poverty is not the responsibility of one person or one nation. It is a process that every one of us can participate in. It is neither an unattainable slogan nor a goal that must wait until the whole world is rich to achieve. It is hidden in every act of listening to the real needs of the poor, hidden in every action that precisely solves a small problem, and hidden in every expression of goodwill that says, I can help too. Just like the poor who continue to strive amidst hardship. Pak Sudarno in Indonesia starved herself to send her son to school. Hasina in India, no matter how difficult, wanted a future for her child. They never gave up hope, and we shouldn't either. When more people are willing to pause, see the truth of poverty clearly, and make even tiny efforts, the small obstacles trapping the poor will eventually be moved one by one, and poverty will move further and further away from us. Finally, congratulations on finishing another book.